Right, kia ora everyone, welcome. Grab your seats. Hope you all got some coffee and drink. Next up, we've got Lozza. I offered her some Fago backstage before realising that she's not that type of clown. Lozza has spent 10 years in the circus before deciding that computers pay better. She now does GRC and works in the government assessing all of the risks. I'd like you to a big round of applause for Lozza.
Kia ora tātou. So, I know what you're thinking. I'm a little bit shorter in person than you expected. I know the title of the talk is Preached by a 10-foot Clown. Really sorry to disappoint, I'm actually only 9.5 feet. But I'm not the first person to lie about 6 inches, am I? So, I'm Lozza. Bogan did a great summary of who I am. Circus performer turned governance, risk, and compliance person. Those are the most exciting words you're going to hear in this talk, I'm sure. So, I'm not formally a clown, but I like to pretend I am. Clowns are the best rule breakers. So, a clown acts the fool. The court jester was the only person who was allowed to mock the king. Clowns, in order to safely do something wrong and do something playful, actually need a really good understanding of how to do it right first. To break a rule, you need to know you need to know the rule quite intimately. And so, clowns are a little bit hackers by nature. So today, I'm going to be telling you a few tall tales. Maybe you'll learn something, probably not, but I hope you'll have fun with me. So, all of these stories happened over 10 years ago. The makeup hides a lot. I'm older than I look. And so I think the statute of limitations has run out on them. But I was never doing any malicious activity. I wasn't a security professional at the time. And my intent was never to breach security provisions, health and safety provisions, or just well-laid plans. But I'm going to be telling you about the ways that I did just that. So, the year was 2009. I was down in Dunedin at the Cadbury Jaffa race. And for anyone unfamiliar with Dunedin or the Jaffa race, this was back when we had onshore manufacturing. And Cadbury had a factory down in Dunedin. And so every year they would roll Jaffas, about yay big little orange balls, down the street, Baldwin Street. It's the steepest street in the world, according to the Guinness World Book of Records. And it has a gradient of 35 degrees, which is like 40 degrees is like there. So it's just that it's really, really steep. And they would tumble 75,000 Jaffas down the hill for fun and fundraising and all that kind of carry on. So I was tasked with entertaining the crowd down the bottom of the street. And I was milling about the crowd. My costume at the time was a big hoop skirt. I was a Victorian lady. I had a big coiffed, poofy wig. I looked fabulous. And so I was milling round the bottom of Baldwin Street, and I didn't have the space and scale that I had here. There were 10,000 people there. So my legs were cramped. And it was thick with people, so I was trying to entertain people while being like, oh God, child, get out of the way. I don't kick children, that's not very nice. But yeah, so wandering about was quite difficult. However, lo and behold, look up the street, it was really clear. There were no people along the street. They'd swept it. They'd set up a security perimeter. No one was hanging out on the actual road. And so I was looking up there and I was like, that looks really nice, having all that leg space. And so I decided I would take a stroll up the steepest street in the world. And so I walked up to one of the security guards they had posted around the perimeter because they wanted to stop children running into the road, getting hit by a Jaffa. Jaffa, with its size and the gradient, they actually go a little over 100 kilometers an hour. So that's a massive projectile, actually faster and harder than a paintball. So it's going to hurt. So they'd cordoned it off. But I wanted to go for a walk. So I went up to the security guard and I said, excuse me, I would like to go for a stroll up that hill. Can I? And he was like, yeah, that's all good. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just need a little help over the barrier. And so he held up his hand and I took it like the Victorian lady I was. I stepped over the barrier and I walked up the street. Now, on the way up Baldwin Street, it was actually easier than if I were a short person, short, normal height, vertically challenged. And so I was taking massive steps up. It was quite efficient. I was making good headway. I was giving high fives to children along the edges of the street as I went up. And then I got to the top. Everybody cheered. It was amazing. All of the race officiators at the top were giving me high fives and they were like, this is really cool. And so I reveled in the glory of walking up the steepest street in the world, and so did everybody else. And then I looked back down the street and I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. There was nowhere for me to sit down, take off my stilts. There was no one to help me. And so I thought about my choices in life and decided the only way back down was the way I came up. And so I lifted my skirts and I walked down the street, like leaning way back, because my back was actually only about that far from the ground. So falling that way, not a problem. Was hoping that was what was going to happen, because falling forwards was absolutely terrifying, and I was having flashes of like ruining thousands of childhoods by just tumbling down the hill and ending up like a mangled mess of a clown at the bottom of the steepest street in the world. By some miracle, this didn't happen. I slid down on the backs of my rubber footings, which were about that big, and only the very back crescent was actually in contact with the ground. Slid down, got to the bottom by some miracle, unscathed, unharmed. And there were lots and lots of claps, and I was like, let's never do that again. And so, despite the fact that they probably had health and safety plans, they had a run sheet of what time things should happen. I actually delayed the race by about 20 minutes. So that was a bit of a problem. As well as just doing something that's insanely unsafe. But I got away with it because I asked nicely and I looked a bit odd. So, I want to tell you about another story where I actually did kind of compromise some security. A little bit more than the last one. So I was commissioned to do an end-of-year party for a big bank. I won't tell you what color they were. So it was held at their offices and spread across 5 different floors. The theme of the end-of-year Christmas party was carnival, and each department had decorated their own zone with their interpretation of the theme. They got it a little bit wrong in some areas, so I was in the carnival area with the jugglers, the laughing clowns game where you throw balls at their faces, and sleepwalkers like myself. There was another section of the bank that they'd misread it as carnival. It is, and lots of beads. There was another section where I think they thought they were going to Brazil, but got lost and ended up in Mexico because that was a Day of the Dead carnival. It was an interesting interpretation. And so, to entertain everyone when you're on stilts, unless you've managed to collect everyone in a really convenient crowd, like this scenario, when you're roving, you have to walk around everywhere. And you have to be everywhere all at once. And so that means spending 5 minutes in one zone and then leaving, going to the next zone. So everyone's like, yeah, that clown, there the whole night. So great. And so I was having to move through different floors. This particular bank, the main thoroughfare of getting between different floors was an escalator. As you can imagine, stairs are not my friends. And escalators are just a whole nother layer of challenge. So escalators were out. I was not doing that. But they did have lifts. And so there was a lift that went between all of the floors. And because it was an end-of-year Christmas party, they were expecting, like, people were going to bring their friends and their partners. Not everyone had access cards, which, of course, they had electronic access cards to access each individual floor and granular access control to make sure that people weren't ending up on the wrong floor. But not everyone would actually have access. And so they'd assigned a security guard at the lift to escort visitors. Great policy. And so I'd be hanging around with the jugglers, trying to juggle. I'm not very good, and when I drop them, it's actually a bit of a problem. So I wasn't doing too much of that. So I'd be hanging around in the carnival area, and then I'd go over to Carnival, shake a little bit, and I'd do that by taking the lift. The security guard would escort me through the different floors, into the different doors, to the different zones, every 5 minutes. And you know what? He got real sick of me, real quick. It was a bit much work for him to be tailing me around. And so he decided that the easiest way around this was to give me his access card. Because I'm trustworthy. Look at me. You'd give it to me, right? And so, security guard access cards have access to everywhere. So I now had got access to the bank. So I didn't abuse it, of course, although I did want to see if there were parties on other floors. So I rode the lift. I checked out some of the dark, spooky, unlit floors, only lit by computer screens that were actually unlocked, which is a bit of a problem. They shouldn't do that, but they did. 10 years ago, I'm sure they're doing much better now. But obviously I was like, there's nobody here to see how cool I look. I will go elsewhere. And I didn't clone it, and I gave it back at the end of the night. I know, really boring. But he shouldn't have done that. But the cost of the control was actually more than what he thought was the risk. And so if we make security hard, users are going to find a way to subvert it and give clowns their access cards. So, I have another story for you. This one I was not employed. I was not employed at all. So I was going to work and income, WINS, New Zealand, because I was an unemployed stilt walker. Social security is great, and we should have fallback nets to make sure that when we're not employed, we can still eat. So I was, thank you. Excellent. Yes, support the poor. Yeah. So I was an out-of-job stilt walker. I had applied to Auntie WINS, and they sent me a letter saying that I had to come to an appointment and prove that I deserved money. And they said in the letter that I was to dress for success. They elaborated upon this. They told me to dress for the job I was going for. Yeah. So as an out-of-work stilt walker, I thought, well, I should probably put my costume on. But I wanted to be classy, a corpo clown, if you will. This is actually exactly what I wore. Quite an odd costume. I think the lighting's quite good. You can't see that it's a little bit raggy. So this is how I went to WINS, because this is what success looks like to me. And actually, as a side note, it literally is. Doing this here in front of you all is actually on my bucket list. So thank you so much for... Yay! Life achievement unlocked. So I was dressing for success. I stilted up just down the road, sitting on top of a car. Usually the easiest way to do it. And I wandered along the streets of Invercargill. That was where I was at the time. So, going for my appointment at the Invercargill WINS office. I arrived nice and early, about 15 minutes early, borderline rude. I've since found out that that's maybe a little too early, but I thought it might take me a little longer to get in the door. So, went to the sliding automatic double doors. They opened for me, but I like to pretend that I open them, so I like swish my arms, and then they open. And they had a privacy screen just in front of the doors, which is good. You should feel you have privacy when you're talking about the challenges that you're facing in life at a place like WINS. So they had this privacy screen just in front of the doors, and it was anticipated to stop anyone from the street being able to see into the open office. However, it was only 8 feet tall. And so as I walked in the door, there was a disembodied clown head bobbing along, which was quite fun. The waiting area was just on the other side. And so I was poking my head over, waving at the children having a miserable time while their parents begged for money. And people were baffled. They were just like, what's going on? And at the side of the wall, as you stepped out into the office, I had a bit of fun. I kicked my leg out. I poked my head out. I did the grand unveiling, and people were aghast. Jaws dropped. Jaws, not drawers. Jaws dropped. Not that kind of place. And so everyone was quite shocked, including the receptionist. So I wandered up to the receptionist. I'd actually had dealings with her before. She looked at me and she said, "Lauren, I presume?" And I was like, "That's me. That's my legal name, by the way. Don't tell anyone." So she knew who I was. She knew what I was up to. And so she started kind of getting her paperwork ready, typing in the, to find the appointment calendar, all that kind of thing. And standard procedure is to present your ID when you get to wins, so they can positively identify you, make sure that you're not doing any benefit fraud. Tax fraud is probably a more likely risk, but yeah, let's stop people getting the bare minimum. So she took my ID. She looked at my goofy smile on my driver's license. She looked at the goofy smile that I painted on my face, and she was like, "I actually can't properly verify that this is you because you're wearing a bit much makeup." And I was like, "I mean, that does kind of make sense. I'm in full clown. However, you did know who I was when I walked in the door, didn't you? So have you not already identified me?" And I may have gotten a little argumentative. She may have gotten a little over with arguing with a clown. And so she resigned herself to the situation she had found herself in. And she told me to go sit in the waiting area. And so I went towards the waiting area and I was like, "You've got very short seats. Do you have any high chairs?" And she was like, "Can you just stand there?" And I was like, "You know what would be more fun? Could I wander around and say hi to people? And I've got some lollipops here. Can I give them to the children?" And she was like, "No, absolutely not. What are you talking about? Like, this is a professional place. We're trying to do work. Stop it." And so I was like, "Okay, I'm very sorry. I'll go stand in the waiting area." So I stood in the waiting area and the kids were entranced. I was giving them lollipops and high fives and everyone was having a great time. And one of the caseworkers, because big open plan office, everyone saw the kerfuffle, the shenanigans, and the various ridiculous happenings right at the front door. So one of the caseworkers, she was between appointments, she left her desk and came over to the waiting area and was like, "Whoa, this is the coolest thing that has ever happened here. Can I, show you to my workmates?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course you can. Show me to your workmates." And so she took me on a guided tour of the Invercargill Winds office. We went round all the desks and said hi, gave high fives. We went into the break room. I gave out lollipops to people on their breaks having cups of tea. We went into some of the back offices, like weird little printing rooms and that kind of thing. And I just said hi to everyone and got to see the inner workings of what Winds was up to. So that was really fun. But time was getting on, and I was aware that I was there for a reason, and I had an appointment, so I was like, as fun as this is, I've actually got somewhere to be. Could I go back to the waiting area so when my caseworker's ready, I can have my appointment, because I know I'm very fun, but I'm actually quite poor. So she took me back to the waiting area, and the receptionist, who was not impressed with my malarkey, gave this caseworker an absolute bollocking. She was like, what are you doing? You can't take this clown around the office. Like, people have private information on screens. They're talking about hard moments in their lives. Privacy. She could be stealing things. You took her to the room that we store the stuff. Don't do that. What were you thinking? So she was really, really cross. And that made me really sad for the worker, the caseworker, who that might ruin her day. So I thought I'd make it a bit fun. So as the receptionist was standing there, telling her off, I was standing behind her. Privacy! Don't do that! And telling her off very sternly. The receptionist would occasionally turn round because her telling off was not having the intended effect. And of course I'd play it cool. Nothing's here. I'm not doing anything. And then she turned back around and I was being very cross with her and telling her off. So the whole time that she was getting very rightly told off for breaching security, I was kind of making fun of the situation and she couldn't stop laughing. And then my caseworker came and we had the actual appointment that I was there to do. And I had a briefcase with me because I'm a professional clown. And there's lots of paperwork that you have to fill out to apply for a benefit. And so the caseworker would ask me, do you have the form that declares, I can't remember what they were, but they were very boring. And so, because I'm a professional clown, I would open my briefcase. I would take out the requisite form, deposit it on her desk, and be like, there we go. There is the form. Also, I know you sometimes lose paperwork here. Here is another form. Also, here's one for fun. And I threw the paper up into the air. So I produced everything in triplicate, and every form resulted in a little flurry of papers that went everywhere because it was fun. So this spectacle was actually quite distracting for some of the people in the office. And I'd gathered somewhat of a crowd around my caseworker's desk because other caseworkers had left their desks. Their clients had followed them. So there were 10 people standing around me while I cracked wise and threw paperwork around and was just generally an idiot. And it was really fun. I was just cracking wise, and this was actually making people's day better. And that's what I want to do as a clown. I want to make light of tough situations. I want to bring fun even to the darkest places like Winds in Invercargill. But not everyone was as open to this kind of fun as the crowd I had. A side door opened up in the wall, and this woman, who looked really, really pissed, came out and started storming across the office. A lot of the people who worked there were like, oh shit, oh no, that's our boss. And so a few of them scuttled back to their desk. A couple of the other ones were just like, oh yeah, no, I'm definitely not having fun. And a hush fell over the crowd. She stormed up to me, and I don't know why she chose the words that she did, but no shit. The words she said to me that day, verbatim, were, excuse me, if you want to get paid from us, you're going to have to actually talk to us on our level. So, I fronted up to her. I stood up real close. I loomed over her. And I know I look real cute, but I can be kind of scary. I loomed over her. And I said, I'm sorry. I can't stoop that low. Approved my benefit on the spot. She turned tail, fucked off back to her office, really embarrassed. Like, do not argue with a fool, because a fool will bring you to their level and beat you with experience. So, I mainly wanted to have fun up here, dance around, be real tall, all that kind of thing. But I do have one little, key takeaway that does relate to security, which is kind of like what we're all interested in, right? So all of these scenarios, I was behaving way out of left field. Like, no one could anticipate that a 10-foot clown is going to show up and just cause a ruckus. I mean, when you invite them, that is actually what you're doing. But, no one can plan for what a clown is going to do, what rules they're going to break. And I like to think that a better security strategy would be to define what normal behavior is. What is your expected behavior? What is your acceptable behavior? What should users, legitimate users, be doing within your environment? And then put controls that stop anything that is not that. And I know, indicators of compromise and known attacks and things that we expect to go wrong should definitely be protected against and monitored. But this kind of exception-based security strategy does not account for 0 days. It doesn't account for novel attacks. And it doesn't account for clowns. So, if we just ring fence what is normal behavior and then block anything else outside of that and ensure that everyone at every level is behaving in an acceptable way, we can actually have more secure environments. So, those are my stories. Those are my tall tales. I hope you've all had a bit of fun. I know I have. I've been Lozza, and you've been absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Kawaiicon! This way, that way.
Hi.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Lozza.